Hi, this is Brian Kim. I'm going to share with you this iStent Inject W case where I have failure on both the first and the second stent. And so I'm still early in my learning curve, and that's why I wanted to share these cases with you. And because of that, I'm actually still with my rep, Ran. He's been great in helping me through these cases. And so he was with me, and you're going to see I had to employ the flush technique on the first stent because it failed to employ correctly. And then for the second stent, I had to rethread and then also employ the dimple technique. And so we'll talk about the difference between the flush technique and the dimple technique. So now I've turned the patient's head away from me. I put a dollop of viscoelastic on the surface of the eye. I'm injecting some viscoat at my incision. I placed the gonio lens on the eye, and then this is the device. I'm going to retract the sleeve. And you can see that the device is already pushed against the wall, and I fired the device, but I don't think it actually embedded correctly. And so I go ahead and take it out. But before I do that, I push the sleeve down to cover the stent and push some viscoelastic in. And lo and behold, it didn't go in. And so what do you do if the first stent fails? You have to employ the flush technique. You do not want to apply pressure on the scleral wall because the second stent will actually impose a force on the first stent like a cue ball in billiards. And so that additional force is such a way that you don't have to perform the dimple technique. And so you can see here the two stents, the one on the back is going to be like the white cue ball. It's going to hit the first stent and it'll cause the first stent to move forward. So that second stent is going to be applying a force on the first stent. So therefore you do not have to employ the dimple technique. You do the flush technique. So I've gone in, I've placed some more viscoelastic in first, and then I'm again perpendicular to the wall. I did not apply any force at all, and then I fired the device. I push the sleeve forward and I go back in with viscoelastic, and thankfully it did embed correctly into TM and Schlemm's canal. I'm just touching it, just making sure that I don't see any of the thorax of the device, and it looks pretty good there. And so again, you want to be perpendicular when you have the device out. You want to be able to see the window of the device. You want to make sure the trocar is not having any lateral tension on it, which can cause the stent to not deploy correctly. So I just rotated my chair in the microscope, and I'm repositioning, injecting some more viscoelastic, placing the device in, retracting the sleeve, and now I'm going to go for the second stent. Again, you want to see the window, make sure it's up and down. You want to approach the trabecular meshwork perpendicular. So again, you want to be straight on, perpendicular. I'm going to dimple in, I'm going to fire. As I come out, I'm not quite sure what it looks like. I push some viscoelastic in, and I feel like it's tilted upward towards me. So yeah, it looks a little bit tilted upward. Even though it looks good, I don't think it is good. And so I asked my rep, so what should we do? And he says, we're going to rethread the stent onto the trocar and perform the dimple technique. So again, if the second stent delivers to fail, but it's still in the eye, you have to rethread the stent onto the trocar and you perform the dimple technique for the second stent. Again, you don't have a cue ball effect from the first stent. So this is not the flush technique. You have to perform the dimple technique because you have to push against the scleral wall in order to help exert that extra force to be able to embed the device. Okay, so here we go. We're going to go ahead and, after putting a bunch of viscoelastic in the eye, I'm going to go ahead and go in with the device, retract the sleeve, and I'm going to try to get that trocar to thread into the device again very carefully. So as I touched it, I could see that the actual face of it rotate towards me in the correct position, and now it actually engaged and is inside the device now. As I'm doing that, I'm realizing the chamber is collapsing on me and the IOL is actually coming upward. I pull the sleeve down to protect the stent. So I come out, I'm injecting some more viscoelastic. You can see that implant is like tilted into the anterior chamber. This patient has a very unusual chamber. I push some cohesive and then dispersive at my wound, and then I'm going back. Again, the sleeve is down. I'm going in. I'm going to go ahead and retract my sleeve. So the device is just at the tip. Again, for the second device, you have to do the dimple technique. And so I'm going to approach it perpendicular to TM. Make sure I have a good view, no pressure on the cornea. Dimple. And then I fired. And then I'm going to retract, come out, push some viscoelastic in. And so thankfully it's actually in good position. And so, you know, I basically went through all the potential problems with this procedure. The first one I could not deploy and it was still on the tip. And so I had to do the flush technique because again, on the first stent, you have to use the flush technique because again, like a cue ball effect, the second stent, which is behind the first stent, will hit the first stent as it's being injected. And then for the second stent, when it didn't deploy, it actually stayed in the eye. I had to rethread it on my trocar, and then I had to perform the dimple technique, again, because that there's no stent behind it to exert that additional force. So I have to push on the scleral wall for that additional force to help deploy the second stent. So again, first stent, the flush technique, second stent, dimple technique. And by the way, you can see I'm pointing out with my cannula the beautiful blanching that's seen of the conjunctival vessels nasally in the area of the iStent Inject W. So I hope this was helpful to you, and I thank you for your attention.